about 4 seconds.
Okay,
And I'll
but
start
can you hear me?
Yes. All right. Hello and welcome to another Facebook Live author interview brought to you by Booktrib, the leading source for book news and reviews. My name is Chelsea Ciccone. I'm an editor at Booktrib, and today I'm joined by author, documentary filmmaker, and historian Richard Webb Jr. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Chelsea. Thanks for having me. Say hello to Meryl, who's the best publicist that there is. Big fan, and it's nice to meet you.
So nice to have you here. So we're going to talk about your book, Boats Against the Current, The Honeymoon Summer of Scott and Zelda. And this book advances the theory that the inspiration for the Great Gatsby was not Great Neck, Long Island, but rather Westport, Connecticut, which is where you grew up. And it also happens to be where Booktrib's office is located. So small world.
It's named Boats Against the Current for a couple of reasons. One, it's almost the last line of it's in the last sentence of the Great Gatsby. And also to prove this theory, as one Fitzgerald scholar said when I started this research, he said, if you get Westport in the top 25 places that influenced Fitzgerald, it's a noble cause, but you will fail. And indeed, Barbara's article was suppressed. The editors of the New Yorker were called up by the leading Fitzgerald scholar, Matthew Burke, and basically squashed the story because it didn't fit with his theory. And the irony is that Bruckle researched here one summer in Westport and rented my best friend's house, which is about 4 houses away from here. So it was an uphill battle. And basically, I've been pursuing this story for over 40 years, off and on, but pretty intensely in the last decade.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. It's a labor of love. So I've read everything written by both of them. I've read everything written about them. And what happened was academics and writers, biographers, I should say, can be very lazy. They'll read a book about a subject. They will then write a book about the same subject and incorporate a lot of stuff from the book they read, never questioning the actual veracity of it. So when I read everything that both Scott and Zelda wrote, it shows up in Beautiful and Damned, it shows up in Gatsby, it shows up in, I think, his best essay, short story, which was Cruise of the Rolling Junk. It showed up in her only play. It showed up in her only novel. They never wrote about Great Neck, zip, zero, anything, except in, letters to friends. But I do want to make clear that it's what I like to call a beachy blend of Great Neck and Westport. Absolutely, Great Neck, has value as part of the story. And indeed, the head of the Great Neck Historical Society said after seeing the book, she says that Great Neck concedes to Westport, surrenders to Westport as the main, influence on the Great Gatsby. But it's definitely Great Neck too. It's a synthesis.
Sure. So if, you said you grew up about a quarter mile away from this house that they spent 5 minutes in the summer. Were you aware of that growing up? How, I assume obviously you've been to the house. Was that something that in the town of Westport it was common knowledge?
It was to my family. My parents were highly literate. It was not known to most of the town. And a matter of fact, we've now got it on the map. But as I think it was Gore Vidal said, we're the United States of amnesia, in that we forget our history. There's benefits to that, by the way. And that Neil Ferguson, the historian, said that the United States will not collapse because of political or economic deficit. It will collapse because of attention deficit. So the town, which has more, you can look it up on Wikipedia, like famous people from Westport, Connecticut. Maybe in Hollywood there was as many. I actually don't think so. But if you look at the list of the famous people that grew up here, lived here, it's mind-boggling. I'll argue it's the most famous of the famous, where they resided in all of American history. But people can look that up on Wikipedia. It's fun. So Westporters have always been, very blasé about fame. We had Paul Newman lived here for ages, and everybody left them alone. Everybody left them alone. And by the way, cited in Fairfield and Westport lately is Bradley Cooper and Leonardo DiCaprio. We don't know why. I know one of them's renting a house, and they're showing up everywhere. So we don't know what they're here for. But in general, we tend to just let them be. Let them be.
It's nice for them. Works out. Maybe that's why they keep coming here.
I think it leads to kind of a comfort factor. That they feel that they can come here, and it's so close to New York. It's so close to New York, and that's why this town has a lot of attraction.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit more about your research, because as you said, you've been researching on and off for almost 40 years, more heavily in the last decade. So, you said that Barbara's article in the New Yorker was what kind of, brought your attention to this, among other things. Is that where you started when you really started seriously looking at, taking on this project? Or where do you start with it? This is a huge thing that you've done. So where do you start when you're wanting to research this?
Boy, you're a good interviewer. Excellent. No, really. It kicked off in 1996. So very long story short. I became an educator after three other careers. Taught for 24 years. I'm retired now. Taught for 24 years at the high school and college level history, sometimes literature. And what I began to do was I put together a PowerPoint, very low tech but effective, and I began to make. I can't even count the amount of presentations I made at libraries, historical societies, schools, and slowly and over time, it was not a big following, basically the people who saw it, right? But a lot of people saw it. So slowly I began to build the case until I realized that I had to go much further with it. And, as a result of that, I met the fabulous Meryl Moss and her fabulous company. Big shout out to Meryl Moss. I recommend her to everybody.
She's really great. We all love her.
Yeah, personality-wise, she's fabulous too.
Definitely. So, when you're conducting this research, what would you say is the most valuable resource at your disposal?
Oh, good. Another great. I'll stop saying that. All your questions are great. You read them. You go to the source. You go to primary documents. When I grew up, my history teachers always said, never believe everything you read. And I'm like, yeah. Just let me survive your class. But when I actually did the most intense primary, I did it a lot as a historian and a teacher. But when I could tell you, slight exaggeration, but I could tell you where apostrophes and periods and exclamation points are in their works. By the way, those little details are very, very significant, actually. So all of a sudden, it was kind of like, oh, this is good. Let me say this. I just came up with this. So imagine reading so a lot of spies used invisible ink, right? Mm-hmm. So it was often written under, between the lines of a book or a letter. Well, I don't know. It's as if that invisible ink I could see it. And all of a sudden, I just saw Westport as the underpinning again of five of his great short stories, two of his novels, and again, her only play and her only. Matter of fact, her only novel, Save Me the Waltz, has a significant honeymoon period. They're barely fictionalized portraits of Scott and Zelda. And it's Westport all over again. It's unbelievable. There's a great line: until you plagiarize it, it's not your own. I want people to think about it. We all have influences, right?
Mhm.
And then like, for example, I wasn't at the American Revolution, So what I do is, I read sources and I begin to, it's a form of plagiarism. And I used to tell my students, and trust me, it was within limits and they learned about cheating and all that stuff, but that they should plagiarize. You know what I mean? It's something you should actually kind of do, and it's okay within limits.
Yeah.
Within limits.
There's teachers in the comments going, ah!
You know what? Can I tell you this? It's because they've never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right. So you ask students to, I won't go off on this, to write an essay. Were you ever given exemplars of an essay? Were you ever given books to read? When you wrote your short stories for an English lit class, did they have a bit of Hemingway in them? Did they have a bit of, I don't know, J.K. Rowling? Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Feel free to use it. It's copyrighted. So it's like every time you say it, just send me $5.
So you've said that you've read everything that they've written, everything written about them. What is your favorite of their works, or one of the most significant works you've read about them?
The best biography was written by a Frenchman, André Levot, Levot. So that's where I think you should also read Matthew Broccoli for kind of an overview. But the most intense biography I read was again, André Levot, Levot. In terms of reading, I read, it depends on when I was reading it. So for example, I always try to read The Great Gatsby every few summers. And as I age, I know I don't look at, but as I age, there's more stuff that I'm like, well, I didn't look at it that way. So I read This Side of Paradise. It's about a guy in college. I hadn't gone to college yet. I was like, oh, that's what college is. That's fabulous. When I read about The Beautiful and Damned, it was about love, marriage, greed. And, I was looking for love, not marriage. But I was also fascinated by the theories of greed and things like that. Gatsby is the perfect novel of the 20th century, hands down, 50,000 words. It's quick, it's perfect. Again, that Mark Twain saying, sorry for writing you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. So is every word significant? But it's every sentence has something to do with building or connected to the rest of the book. My favorite short story was Cruise of the Rolling Junk, written about when they piled. By the way, you mentioned, and I just want to make this correction. You said that they were here for 5 minutes, and that's funny. But I just want to, yeah. I don't mean to point that out, but I just want the audience to know that I don't, trust me. But I want the audience to know that it's 5 months. And by the way, that was the exact average of where they lived throughout their entire lives, 5 months. They led a very peripatetic existence, never owned property. But what's interesting is the longest place they lived was Great Neck, 1.5 years, and they never wrote about it. And as I make a point in the book, when you're on your honeymoon period, okay, you're at the happiest of the marriage, even when you get divorced later. And what happened was Zelda, she was 19 when she came here. 19. Many people don't realize how young she was. He was 24. And she went, it was bipolar. You'll hear a lot of theories about how she suffered, but she was in mental institutions 10 years later, 29 on. And Scott was drinking so much that I think over time, he began to develop, I haven't read this, but I think it's kind of emblematic. I think he began kind of an alcoholic psychosis. where it was difficult for him to write drunk. It was definitely difficult for him to write drunk. And I think he just, at one point, he was anesthetizing himself. Long stretches, was in the hospital 5 times to dry out. That's drinking, man, especially when you're there three days. So what they did, and I know that they did this, is that they went back to those crystalline memories of their honeymoon. They vividly remembered. It's like, what those childhood memories you have, right? Why do we remember those things and we can't remember, last Tuesday? In my case, yesterday, right? So that's why I found that it was so powerful for both of them. And tragic. By the way, Zelda's family suffered from mental illness. It's definitely genetic, hereditary. Her brother jumped out of a window and killed himself. And family members were killing themselves well back into the 19th century. So she really suffered. She really suffered.
Is it a sympathy for her? I know you mentioned in the book that you have a special place for her. Is that?
Oh yeah, thank you for reading it. Not that this is you'll get what I'm talking about, but Mark Twain said, "What's a classic? A book nobody actually ever reads." And by the way, most people just look at the pictures, which is great. Which is great because it is a coffee table book, but it's a I think. By the way, am I tooting my own horn here? Yeah, a bit, but honestly, I'm not. Charles Scribner, okay, a couple of people, including the biggest Fitzgerald scholar, said this is the most significant new theory about the Great Gatsby in the last 50 years, okay? And by the way, I can only do a limited run of these books because the Fitzgerald estate gave me special permission to show some pictures because they knew I was passionate. They knew I was the real deal. You're not going to see these pictures in other books, and I'm only allowed to do a limited edition. So the pictures are fantastic. Again, you'll get a real sense of their lives, their fun, their love. I fell in love with Zelda multiple times. My dog, my schnoodle, is named Zelda, and my Havanese is named Daisy after Daisy Buchanan. So I'm infatuated. Just a fun aside about Zelda. People who have read bios about her. If you look at pictures of her, you're like, they're attractive, but everybody said that the pictures did no justice to her, and that men were most of Scott's friends hit on her. She just arrested people with her beauty and because she was, look, if you're bipolar at 29, right? I'm not a psychologist, but I think this is a good theory. You're already on the way, before. And so her phrases were these interesting phrases. They were in parts nonsensical and in parts just accidental, stunning visions and poetry. By the way, and I was thinking about writing a book on this too. Oh, geez, better not spill the beans. Anyway, what Scott did was plagiarize her diaries. So a lot of his female characters were Zelda. Some of the lines he used, and I have segments of that where I show Zelda's lines and then what Scott wrote in his fiction. It's almost 1-to-1. And those were in the basement of their Westport house that honeymoon summer. And George G. Nathan, the great critic, found them. Everybody had passed out after the major party. By the way, that's all they did. So parties would start Thursday afternoon and then essentially end about Wednesday morning. The 4th of July party was, epic. But Scott said, so Nathan found them. He wanted to use them. Scott said, no, absolutely not. Because, he had Coford. He used to walk around and she'd say something at a bar, restaurant with a friend, and he'd grab a napkin and write it down. So he was walking around a lot with these bits of paper stuffed in his pockets with her phrases. And Save Me the Waltz, her only novel, has a lot of value. I found it agonizing to get through because it's hallucinatory. But like some hallucinations, it has incredible power and insight. So you go through these sentences, which are like, wow. The problem is a couple of sentences later, Chelsea, you're like, what the heck is she talking about? So I shouldn't say this about her, and I'm sure some people like that. That was the only thing I read that either of them did that was torture. But try it if you want.
Just once, give it a whirl.
Trust me, it's gonna be once. That I can tell you.
So, you've spent years researching, and you spend all this time gathering information, compiling the information, I'm sure whittling it down, because clearly you know way more than what's just on the page in the documentary. How, you've given it to the rest of us. What do you hope that we're going to take away from this project?
Well, I think that's a two-part question, and again, superb. You're a writer, and an edit. First of all, for people who want to write, just write. Don't sit there and agonize about the first word. Just do stream of consciousness. And then I can't tell you the amount of English teachers bumper stickers that I saw in high school parking lots that said revise, revise, revise. So just kind of, I hate to say this word, but it's kind of just barf it out on paper. You can always go back and correct it. And I just had a great editor, and what was, it's really difficult when an editor comes back and goes, get rid of this. Now, in the end, they're right, or if you have a good one. But as somebody said with your writing, when you have to omit stuff, be ready to kill your own child, right? Because I had segments that where I worked hard on, I liked. The book, it's like 100 and less than 200 pages that I did. 500, easy. So I have 300 pages that, and some of it, it just wasn't far from fabulous, but they were right. So again, they're right. What do I want people to walk away with is, that's an easy question. I want them to read Fitzgerald. I want them to read Zelda. It's simple. I want people to challenge assumptions. I want people to follow their green light. This was my green light. And I was interviewed by Vanderbilt magazine. If my former professors at Vanderbilt saw that I was in Vanderbilt magazine, and I'm not plugging that, but it's part of a good story. So the writer at the end of it said that I had found my green light, which was to prove this theory. So really, it's to read Fitzgerald and Zelda. And I like to think it's one of the greatest love stories in American history. And I also I'm a homer, as they say, for Westport. I love it. And I wanted this town, this is a gift to the town. It really, really is. And I wanted this town because right now it's a town full of hedge funders. Artists can't afford to live here. By the way, all those artists came here in the early 20th century. This is a great fact. You could buy a farmhouse for less than it took to rent a New York City apartment. So the flower of sculptors, and I could go down the list, I won't, you can look it up, and writers moved here. That's long gone. I know 2 artists that are left in this town. There's probably more. but I wanted this town to realize its tremendous cultural heritage because it's losing its identity. Again, the United States of amnesia.
Yeah. So you sort of, I think, hinted to this earlier, but is there, so there's more, is there more to be discovered about Scott and Zelda?
Yeah, now I don't know if it looks like we're running out of time. I was gonna share some images and video clips, but I do, yes. And as a matter of fact, I went down, I never leave this rabbit hole, ever, 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 ever. So what I did was, this is the Centennial Edition. Now, what does that mean? It's the second edition. The first one sold out, which but it was a limited run. Why a Centennial Edition? Because it's 2020. It's exactly 100 years since the Fitzgeralds have been here. Yeah, and I found two more. They were neighbors of the Fitzgeralds. I found two more extremely plausible templates for Gatsby. Two men that did major contributions to American history. One of them was on par with Carnegie and Rockefeller and Edison in terms of what he created towards the infrastructure of the United States that we still use today. And so so Gatsby, the character, is an amalgam of different people and tempered with the fact that Scott Fitzgerald said this: all my characters are Scott Fitzgerald, a famous quote. So there's a mishmash. I'll throw out one, George Remus, R-E-M-U-S. Fabulous story behind him. People should check that out. So again, it's many, many people that Fitzgerald synthesized.
All right. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing what you have to share about the Fitzgeralds in the future. I definitely need to pick up a couple more books by them. And this is, if that's what you wanted out of this, one person is definitely going to pick up another Fitzgerald and give it a whirl. This book is fabulous. Anyone, if you're a fan of Gatsby, if you're a fan of the Fitzgerald, this is definitely worth not just a look through at the pictures, but there's some really great information in here. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. This was a blast. I hope you had a great time chatting about your work.
Chelsea, some of the best questions. I do a lot of these, some of the best questions truly that I got. And I'm going to give a challenge and give some people some homework, as the old teacher in me does. Take The Great Gatsby and read it on a summer day. And you can do it. It's 50,000 words. And just fall in love with it all over again, and fall in love with it, you will. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Richard.